So, another week in the month of February and another ecchi show to review. This time we'll be reviewing Mayo Chiki, a show that I thought had an original feel and a genre flooded with stereotypes and unoriginality. This show seemed like just enough of a breath of fresh air to me, to the point where I actually found a great deal of enjoyment in this show compared to other shows of the genre, and that's saying a lot. So let's find out what makes this show so special in the third review of Ecchi Month, where I review an ecchi show every Saturday in the month of February, Mayo Chiki. Mayo Chiki is a story about Sakamachi Kinjiro, a boy who has developed gynophobia because of his constant abuse by his pro wrestler mother and aspiring pro wrestler sister. This causes his nose to bleed whenever he comes in contact with a girl. Where the story really kicks off is when Jiro wanders into the boy's bathroom only to discover the most popular boy in school, the butler of the principal's daughter Konoe Subaru, is actually a girl. This means that Jiro has found out her secret and that she will do whatever it takes to keep that a secret. When the principal's daughter, Sutsuki Kanade, finds out about his gynophobia, she promises to cure him in exchange for keeping the gender of Konoe a secret, because if it is found out that Konoe is a girl, she can no longer be Kanade's butler. And of course, with a setup like this, ecchi moments in the build-up of a harm are sure to ensue as the characters take on the usual antics of an ecchi comedy. Now, where I feel this show gets that original feel I mentioned earlier is in its concept. While granted it's not the most original, I feel it gave me enough to say, hey, this isn't so bad for an ecchi comedy, and because of that little bit of effort put in to create a different type of ecchi harm, my enjoyment was increased. Now, of course, because I signed myself up to do this ecchi month thing, I'm really just taking everything as it is, meaning that I'll be reviewing these shows for what they are as opposed to reviewing them based on the normal criteria. That being said, for an ecchi harem, this show did a fair amount of things that I was pleased with, but of course it's not without its fair share of low points. This show's construction focuses heavily on ecchi based comedy. A construction like this really leaves no room for anything dramatic, but this show decides to throw some in the mix anyway. Is this a bad thing? Well, it's hit or miss depending on how and the extent to which it's used. Mayo Chiki's moments of drama fall into three categories: trivial moments that had no place in the show, moments that are used to drive character development, and moments that are used to give us something that we don't see in anime nowadays: actual romantic progression. Whoa, don't get too excited now. This isn't like some Rakudai Kishi no Cavalry romantic progression, but we'll get into that in a second. There are some moments in this show where dramatic tension is introduced and it really feels out of place within the show, and to the point where it takes away more than it adds. Thankfully, these moments are few and far between, but you can clearly tell when it happens. The second type is the dramatic tension used to give characters development, and the upside to this is that the show tones it down to the point where the characters get much into development without it feeling overbearing. The last type is used for actual romantic progression. While there wasn't enough romantic progression to make me feel completely satisfied, it had enough to the point where I felt the show didn't start off at square one in terms of the relationship between the two main characters, and that was enough for me, especially in comparison to other shows in a genre where genuine romantic resolution always seems out of grasp. In terms of ecchi, this show has a ton, with the main character's condition being the center of it. A majority of these scenes consist of your standard boob grabs, shower mishaps, etc., and these scenes are the major source of the show's comedic style. Lastly, the show ends on an open conclusion but leaves you with just enough to be satisfied with it. With no second season confirmed, it doesn't look like there will be a continuation of the story's conclusion, so what you see is what you get. For the story of Mayo Chiki, it really sets up an interesting concept within the genre, or at least interesting enough to capture my intrigue. With the show mainly revolving around ecchi comedy, there was hardly any room for dramatic tension as shown by the moments the show tried to add some only to fall on its face, but the show was able to incorporate some dramatic tension to allow for character development and romantic progression that was toned down enough to not take away from the value of the show. And don't get your hopes up when I say romantic progression, because it's very little, but at least the show didn't feel like it ended at square one like all harems out there. I'm looking at you, Nisekoi. The conclusion for this show is an open one with no continuation by way of a second season confirmed, but leaves you with just enough to make you feel satisfied by the end. And the ecchi for this show is heavy given the main character's condition, and if it's ecchi you want, you come to the right place. While the characters for this show are something to be desired, just like everything else about the show up to this point, they are just a bit better than other ecchi harems. The main characters have a bit of backstory that doesn't seem overbearing or forced, and as opposed to the archetypes of characters driving the comedy, it felt as though it was the character's individual personality that was the medium for the comedic scenarios. The first character of Mayo Chiki is Sakamachi Kinjiro. The protagonist of the story, Jiro, is a second-year high school student who discovers Konoe's secret. He suffers from gynophobia, causing his nose to bleed whenever a girl touches him. He reveals the cause of this to be his mother and his sister practicing their wrestling moves on him on a daily basis for 10 years, and he states his nose bleeds when a girl touches him because his body developed the reflex because he believed his mother and sister would stop beating him once he started bleeding. He was forced to sign a contract with Kanade to help him rid his fear of girls. However, he was to keep Konoe's secret of being a real girl to himself, otherwise, according to Kanade, an unidentified body may appear in the sea of trees around Mount Fuji within a month or so. As he by force signed the contract, he was saved from his said fate. Jiro basically is your standard harem protagonist, but he does have a tad bit of backstory that gives us insight into why he does what he does, making him just a bit more than your standard harem protagonist. But aside from that, there really is nothing that makes him stand out or memorable at all. The second of our main protagonists is Konoe Subaru. Subaru serves as a butler to Kanade even though she is a female. Her father will only allow her to maintain her position if she can spend her entire 3 years in high school without anyone discovering her true gender. As a result, she must cross-dress. Fortunately, her physical features allow her to pass as a boy provided no one looks too closely. Complications arise when one day Kinjiro accidentally discovers her secret. Although she initially hates Kinjiro, both because he discovered her secret and for being a pervert, over time she warms up to him and becomes her first friend. As a result, she becomes less cold and more outgoing. Her father even notices that she has started looking forward to going to school. Eventually, she falls in love with Jiro. Konoe's character was actually surprisingly good. She's given a good amount of backstory shown through dramatic scenes and never becomes too overbearing given the context of the show, and this really makes her character stand out amongst the cast. But alas, despite this, she is still rather shallow, being a generic cross-dressing tsundere throughout most of her screen time. The next character, and definitely the most memorable of the show, is Kanade Suzutsuki. Kanade is the single daughter of the high school's principal, who on the outside behaves like a rich man's daughter. On the inside, she is revealed to be quite sadistic and threatens Kinjiro on his greatest fear and using his gynophobia to make him suffer. She is shown to enjoy tormenting and teasing Kinjiro by using his gynophobia against him. However, she did give thoughts about finding a way to cure his gynophobia, although her methods to do so are generally overcomplicated or humiliate him in some way, and she does not deny that she finds them amusing. She notes that Kinjiro is the first and only man who is willing to talk her down, and she has fallen in love with him as a result. Her character doesn't have anything that makes her character good like development or backstory, but the thing that makes Kanade so fun is her personality. Most of the time in shows of this type, characters are just shells with archetypes used solely for the sake of comedy. But the thing I did like about this show is that as opposed to the comedy being driven by the character's one defining trait, it's more driven by their personality, with Kanade being the best example. Her personality shines throughout the show, and it makes her a very fun character with her sadistic schemes and antics. She's also the main source of ecchi in the show, mainly with her constant agitation of Kinjiro's gynophobia. The rest of the cast is somewhat lackluster, but are all lovable in their own way despite lack of anything that, makes a good character. Masamune Usami blackmailed Kinjiro with a picture of him and Subaru on a mock date to be her boyfriend up until the end of their school fair. Kinjiro accepted because of the condition that she will not spread the photo of Subaru and Kinjiro going out together. However, she later becomes friends with Kinjiro and later falls in love with him. She is your standard tsundere-ish character, but has some development as the show progresses, although this development is nothing new. I do think she isn't a terrible character, but her development is kind of like someone giving you a piece of candy you've had 1,000 times. You don't hate it and you're happy to have it, but you've had it so many times you can't help but want something different. It's really standard development for characters of the genre, but isn't terrible. Kuriha Sakamachi, after watching and following Kinjiro and Konoe, believing him to be a male pervert crossdresser, attacks Konoe to reclaim Kinjiro only to be quickly defeated in turn. After this incident, still believing her as a male, she has fallen in love with Konoe much to Kinjiro's dismay. While tomboyish most of the time, she tends to try and act feminine when Konoe is around. Her character is solely here for the sake of fun, and considering she is voiced by Kana Hanazawa, I can't hate her no matter how little development she has. She's definitely my favorite character in the show by far and the most fun. Lastly, and certainly least, is Nakuru Narumi. She's a perverted BL lover who always wears cat ears and has a glasses fetish. Yep. That's it. Nothing here by way of anything, and one of those characters that makes you question why she's even in the show. The characters from Mayo Chiki, while not being anything special, did have some things to make them lovable, and some even had good backstory and development. While these characters are lacking, I really did enjoy a majority of them even for an ecchi harem cast. The art and animation were really nothing special. I've said it before, but there really aren't many shows of this type with real artistic variety. Shows like Nisekoi and Sarkano were masterful and really individualized themselves, but a majority of these shows just don't seem to be capable of producing something of much merit. But these shows really don't need it. You come for the ecchi, you stay for the ecchi if that's your thing, and as long as the art isn't jarringly bad, you don't really care either way. The character designs were good for this show, feeling individual and adding to the character's personality is really the only standout thing in terms of art. The same goes for the sound. With no real atmosphere to be created, there really is no need for an immersive atmosphere. That's not to say I wouldn't like for an OST to try to be different, but I guess that's too much of a stretch. Again, you don't come for the masterfully composed OST, you come to watch some lucky fellow be swooned by a number of girls wishing you could be in his place. The OP and ED were good, but didn't stand out either. The voice actors all did a good job, but Konoe's character did take some getting used to. She wasn't bad enough to the point of being distracting, but it was a little irritating, but that went away after I got used to it. Also, Kana Hanazawa was as beautiful as always. Marry me please, Hanakana. Mayo Chiki is a show that is really hard to recommend to anyone who doesn't like ecchi harems. If you like ecchi harems, I would say this show does enough to make it interesting, and I would recommend it before any other, but for someone who doesn't like ecchi harems, I would say stay as far away from it as humanly possible. While this show is somewhat of a breath of fresh air for ecchi harems, it's really oversaturated with ecchi harem tropes in terms of the antics of its characters, and this would really make it hard for someone who dislikes these types of shows to find enjoyment in it whatsoever. The story has just enough to make it feel somewhat different, but as previously stated, is oversaturated with ecchi harem tropes. There is romantic progression, but just enough to the point where the show doesn't feel as though it started from square one like all ecchi harems. The characters may not have been amazing, but they were all lovable, and it really felt as though their personalities were what was driving the comedy as opposed to their archetypes. Art, animation, and sound were nothing to write home about, being very average and cookie cutter with the exception of character designs and Kana Hanazawa. Lastly, the ecchi is highly prevalent, focusing mainly on your standard boob grab, shower mishap, etc. For this show being a review in ecchi month, the amount of ecchi was just as much as I was hoping for. In the end, this is a show I can only recommend if you like ecchi harems. It felt like a breath of fresh air within the genre, but in terms of being something people who aren't a fan of ecchi harems can enjoy, it is definitely not so. As for other recommendations, you should watch Date Alive, because let's be real, if you like this show, you have a liking for harems, and this was a fun one for me, especially for a harem. Also, you should watch Oreshura. Aside from the show's hideous ending, it's one of my favorite harems out there. So if you guys enjoyed my review of Mayo Chiki, I hope you guys leave a like, please share this video, and yeah. My name is Energy Pants. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Share this video with everybody you know. Let's one more week of ecchi month, and it will be To Love Through Darkness, not the first season of To Love Through like I was initially planning. We're just gonna skip straight to darkness because who cares? And by who cares, I mean I accidentally torrented the wrong thing and it didn't have subtitles on it. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna review To Love Through Darkness because that'll be more fun. And I'll see you guys next week. Like if you enjoyed, share this video with all your friends, and later.